Based off numbers alone, Jake Elder has the resume for a slam dunk induction into the NASCAR Hall of Fame. 44 wins, the 1968 championship with David Pearson, Darrell Waltrip's first and last wins, Dale Earnhardt's first win. And if they had stayed together, Jake joked that he and Dale would eventually have diamonds as big as horse turds. That was the problem, though. Jake never stayed anywhere for long. He was called Suitcase Jake for good reason. What follows is as close to a comprehensive resume for Jake as you're likely to find. Buckle up. This is going to be a bumpy ride. Back in August 1986, Jake Elder explained to NASCAR Live host Eli Gold how he first got into the sport.
I started off with Richard Petty. That's in 64. I worked for Richard 64 up to 65. Then Chrysler sort of got out of racing, so they were sort of lacking for people, And so I said, well, I'll just go over to Home and Moody's. So I went home and Moody's, started working on race cars over there, started building cars for a while.
Although Jake Elder was said to be functionally illiterate, he would come to be known as one of the smartest chassis experts the sport has ever known. That's how he came to land job after job.
I guess it's a lot of hard work. And I sort of concentrate a little bit more than I guess than the rest of them. I don't know. I guess I do. I just sort of put my mind to it, what I'm going to do, so it seems like everything works out pretty good. I sort of concentrate on that a little bit more than I guess normal people do, or at this day and time. But back when I first started crew chiefing, I sort of put my heart and soul in it, So I worked awful hard at it. And I said I want to learn everything I knew, about this chassis work. And so I sort of picked it up and it sort of come natural.
After leaving Petty Enterprises to join Holman Moody in 1966, Jake won his first race as a crew chief with Dick Hutcherson. He won the 1967 Daytona 500 with Mario Andretti, 3 races with budding superstar Bobby Allison, and 18 with David Pearson in the Holman Moody operation, culminating in the 1968 championship. It was by far the most successful pairing he had with any one driver. Next up was Darrell Waltrip's family-owned team. Although Waltrip won the first Winston Cup race of his career in 1975 at Nashville with Jake, the two didn't always get along.
We didn't have no help, nothing. And Darrell done it by himself, me and him. He sort of knew it all at the time. He thought he did, but he really did, So we just one word got on that. And I said, well, if you think you can do it by yourself, just go ahead and do it. He said, well, I think I can. I said, okay, I'll just step over here and watch you while.
1976 through 1978 saw Jake join team owner L.G. DeWitt and Benny Parsons. That relationship generated 9 wins before Jake made a move over to Harry Ranier's growing team following the 1978 campaign. He didn't stay there for long. March 15, 1979, it was announced that Jake had left Ranier's team to join one fielded by Rod Osterlund for young Dale Earnhardt. Although both sides were optimistic, Elder told Grand National Scene, I wanted to give Osterlund a shot. If after 2 months we can't get along, then I'll leave. They got along all right at first. A little more than 2 weeks after Elder got hooked up with Earnhardt, the rookie won the first Winston Cup race of his career April 1st at Bristol. During Earnhardt's recovery from an injury later in the season, Jake reunited with David Pearson, a stint that culminated with a victory in the 1979 Southern 500. All seemed to be going well, right up to the point that Jake once again went out in a blaze of glory shortly after the 1980 World 600 at Charlotte. Said Jake of team manager Roland Wilatica, Roland could screw up a 5-car funeral. He didn't need me from day one. He was jealous of me because he knew if the car won, I'd get some credit. I wish I'd never gone there. They never appreciated a thing I did. I got them on the winner's circle, on a tire deal. I even got them a sponsor for the sportsman car Dale drove in the Saturday race at Charlotte. Twice over the next few weeks, Jake had deals lined up, only to do an about-face at the last minute. He showed up one morning at Joel Halpern Racing to once again team with David Pearson, decided he couldn't work with the people there, and walked right back out. Again, it was announced that Jake would be joining young Terry Labonte at Hagan Racing before telling riders the next day that he would instead be reuniting with Darrell Waltrip at Dyegard Racing. Mid-February 1981, it was reported that a lack of communication at Dyegard was no longer an issue. Jake added, "We have everything worked out, and all we are going to do the rest of the year is try to win races." Less than a month later, Jake spent most of the rest of the season in limbo, working with A.J. Foyt, Pearson, Harry Gant, Tim Richmond, Rick Wilson, and Bill Elliott, who scored the first pole position of his career in the Spring Rebel 400 at Darlington, with Jake helping turn the wrenches. Jake finally landed with Labonte and Hagan, and in early 1982, both the driver and team owner credited Jake with helping turn their team around. It was said that Jake had finally found a home. There was only one problem. Jake's home in Harrisburg, North Carolina, was an hour and 15-minute drive from the team's shop in Thomasville. Jake told Hagan the drive was killing him and left the team late in the season. During the offseason going into the 1983 season, Jake joined Raymock owners Butch Mock and Bob Rahilly and driver Neil Bonnet before resigning a few days before the Bristol Spring Race in 1983. The rest of that year, Jake worked with Ron Bouchard, David Pearson, Greg Sachs, and Joe Ruttman. There were rumors that Jake would go to work for Junior Johnson to help prepare cars for Neil Bonnet to drive the following year in 1984. Those rumors never panned out. Jake next spent time with youngster Bobby Hillen before splitting in the spring in 1985. About a month later, Jake helped Slick Johnson make the starting grid for the World 600. From there, he headed to Race Hill Farms, where he worked with first Ron Bouchard and then Morgan Shepherd. Morgan hadn't won in nearly 5 years when Jake took him to the first superspeedway victory of his career in the spring of 1986. Jake stayed with the team after it was sold to Cale Yarborough, who bought the team with a better offer than one submitted by none other than Dale Earnhardt. In October, Jake had helped Earnhardt during practice for Charlotte's Busch Series race by changing 3 springs, a sway bar, and 2 shocks. The changes lit the afterburner for Dale, who sat on the pole and led 194 of the event's 200 laps.
Well, we made some changes yesterday afternoon. We weren't too good, but we made some changes after the last practice. Jake Elder set the car up for us, and he helped us an awful lot, and a lot of the credit goes to Jake Elder, and so it was just a good job for everybody involved today.
When Jake left Cale Yarborough Motorsports in April 1987, Dale Earnhardt hired Jake to oversee his Busch Series operation for a spell, before Jake signed up for another round with Hagan Racing later in the season, this time with Sterling Marlin behind the wheel. That deal ended in early 1989. There was a brief stretch in 1989 with Buddy Baker's fledgling Winston Cup team where Jake worked with Greg Sachs and Jimmy Spencer before landing shortly thereafter with Hendrick Motorsports as a chassis consultant and as crew chief for road racing specialist Tommy Kendall in a one-off effort at Watkins Glen. There were rumors in late September 1989 that Jake would be joining King Racing and driver Ricky Rudd. Crew chief Larry McReynolds very flatly denied such speculation. Larry told Winston Cup Scene, "Hearing that Jake was joining us put the team in an uproar, and we don't need any uproars right now. At 8 this morning, I called everyone in the shop and told them this came from Kenny Bernstein himself. There would be no changes on the team, and no people would be added." Jake remained with Hendrick Motorsports, but not for long. When Hendrick driver Ken Schrader won at Charlotte in October 1989, crew chief / team manager Richard Broom gushed, "Jake is my right hand. I can't do without him. He seems to think I can, but I ain't letting him go nowhere. Jake has definitely turned our car around. He's probably the best I've ever seen at chassis setup." That was October 8th. November 16th, it was reported that Jake had been fired by Broom. The following spring, Broom discussed the parting of ways with Jake and fellow former Hendrick Motorsports employee Dennis Conner. Said Broom, "Last year at one point, my right hand didn't know what my left hand was doing. There's no need beating around the bush about it. I had personality conflicts with both of my assistants, and I just can't put up with that crap. I like harmony. I don't want any prima donnas around me." When Steve Bird left Rob Moroso's first-year Winston Cup operation in early 1990, Jake signed on until early July, apparently headed to join team owner Richard Jackson and driver Terry Labonte. Jake's first race with Labonte was to have been the July 22nd, 1990 race at Pocono. However, Jake talked to Robert Yates at Daytona in early July, and just like that, Jake was Davey Allison's crew chief more than 20 years after winning races with Davey's dad, Bobby. March 28, 1991, Jake was let go by Yates. There was a test in there with Mickey Gibbs, and on April 4th, Jake once again landed with Darrell Waltrip. May 16, 1991, Jake had heart surgery, and Jake being Jake, he was back at work in the garage at Charlotte 9 days later. He underwent another heart procedure August 27th, and a little more than a year later, replaced Jeff Hammond as Waltrip's crew chief. A few short weeks later, DW won consecutive races at Bristol and Darlington, the 83rd and 84th and final victories of his career. He had won the first race of his career with Jake 17 years earlier. Bristol and Darlington were also Jake's last wins. Barry Dodson was named crew chief the following offseason, with Jake staying at the shop most weekends as Waltrip's chief mechanic. Finally, November 4th, 1993, it was announced that Jake had left Waltrip's team. For all intents and purposes, Jake's career was over. Here's the thing. Of all the crew chiefs already enshrined in the NASCAR Hall of Fame, all are tied almost exclusively to a particular team and or driver. Dale Inman, Richard Petty, of course, Ray Evernham, Jeff Gordon, and Hendrick Motorsports, Leonard Wood, the Wood brothers, Kirk Shelmerdine, Richard Childress Racing, and Dale Earnhardt. The same can't be said of Jake, but he did win races with no less than 6 NASCAR Hall of Famers as a crew chief, plus Mario Andretti and Richard Petty as a mechanic in the earliest stages of his career. You make the call. Does Jake Elder merit induction into the NASCAR Hall of Fame? I say yes, without reservation.